Welcome to another episode of Sustainability Today. I'm Corey Burbach. I'm the Sustainable Community Coordinator for the City of Dubuque. And today we're talking about the Catfish Creek Watershed Management Authority with Dean Mattoon from the City of Dubuque and Eric Schmeckel from the Dubuque County Soil and Water Conservation District. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us, Corey.
So Dean, maybe you could start for our viewers that are watching by talking a little bit about exactly what a watershed is and specifically about the Catfish Creek Watershed.
Sure. Well, a watershed is just an area of land that all drains to a common source. So whether it be a lake or a river or a wetland or an ocean, everywhere we live we're in a watershed. So specifically the Catfish Creek Watershed is a 46,000 acre piece of ground that runs partially through the City of Dubuque and Dubuque County and some other communities, Asbury, Centralia, Piasta. So the main branch of Catfish runs through a couple of major areas within Dubuque: Swiss Valley Nature Center, Mines of Spain Recreation Area, and then dumps into the Mississippi River from there.
And Eric, I know in 2012 the Catfish Creek Watershed Management Authority was formed. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, the Watershed Management Authority is a board of directors that's composed of members from the City of Dubuque, Dubuque County, City of Piasta, City of Asbury, Centralia, and the Dubuque Soil and Water Conservation District. And their main purpose is to look at water quality and flooding issues within the Catfish Creek Watershed. They do a lot of educational outreach. They recently just worked on and completed the watershed management plan for Catfish Creek, but the word authority can be a little bit misleading. They don't necessarily have any authority over land use decision. It's really more of an advisory board, but they do make recommendations to the related city councils, the board of supervisors, zoning departments, engineering departments, and so forth.
So you said they just finished a plan. Tell me what's happening with the plan. What's the reason for it and what's in it?
The watershed management plan, was developed over the last 2 years, working with Applied Ecological Services, and of course all of our members and their input, and of course the public input session through the whole process. And really, it's a roadmap for the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 30 years, and beyond for land use practices in Catfish Creek, educational outreach activities, conservation projects and practices that could be implemented, invasive species in the watershed. And one thing that we were really happy with in working with AES on the plan was that we didn't just look at water quality in Catfish Creek. We didn't just look at flooding in Catfish Creek. We looked at the full ecological spectrum in this plan. So it looks at, when you hear the word watershed, oftentimes you're thinking of just that water body, the stream. But really, a watershed is dealing more so with land uses and everything that's draining to that stream. That's what this plan is focused on. So it's a large document, but it's our roadmap for the next X amount of years to really implement and put conservation practices in the ground to improve water quality and reduce flooding throughout the watershed.
So what are some of the biggest problems, or you talked about invasive species, flooding. What are the biggest challenges and opportunities that you're trying to address in the plan?
Well, when we're dealing with water quality in the streams themselves within the watershed, we worked for many years doing water quality monitoring in the streams and stream assessments. So some of the biggest problems that we saw within the streams are a heavy presence of E. coli and nitrogen and phosphorus. And most of the stream banks, when you go down and look at them, are eroding. The banks are eroding and the streams are becoming channelized and they can't get out into the floodplain when a heavy rain occurs. So all that water is forced down through the channel. So that's one of the biggest problems, is restoring those stream banks and allowing that water to get back out into the floodplain and do its thing.
And so what are the biggest goals that are included in this plan?
We have a number of different goals, from public education and outreach and getting citizens involved in the watershed to major practices like stream bank restoration and wetland restoration, and working with agricultural producers to do conservation practices on their farms and on their land. Some of the detention basins we have within the watershed already, we're looking at retrofitting those so that they can infiltrate water, capture and clean that water on site rather than allowing it to just sit and then slowly be released to the streams.
It's really a unique watershed because it starts out at Swiss Valley, and it starts out actually as a cold water trout stream where we still do have trout that are naturally reproducing in that stream, and that's pretty cool to have a trout stream a few miles out of town for residents, it's actually become, based on DNR creel surveys, the sixth most fish stream in Iowa. And we're pretty excited about that, and with all the different land uses that go into this watershed, it starts out at agricultural ground and then goes into commercial ground and industrial and residential. There's a lot of challenges there. So we've got a lot of different inputs that we're working on. So when we talk about projects, it's everything from working with agriculture producers to working with developers and builders, and also working with the cities and the supervisors on policy decision making through developments, through ag production. I mean, there's a lot of inputs there. So there's a lot of challenges there, but we're also excited about the plan, having this roadmap laid out for us about getting conservation practices in the ground.
And it sounds like an obvious thing to state, but watersheds are one of the things that are a great example when we talk about sustainability because they don't stop at a political boundary. So it sounds like you've got the county and other communities involved too. Can you talk about what's happening specifically at that city or county kind of policy level?
Well, Dubuque County approved and adopted a erosion control and stormwater ordinance back in March of 2010. And we were one of the first counties actually in the state of Iowa that looked at coming up with regulations that actually take water and infiltrate that water back down into our groundwater table and really minimize runoff in developments and look at reducing flooding at the same time. And the city of Asbury has adopted it. City of Epworth has adopted that policy, as well as the city of Farley. So we've already made some pretty good strides as far as policy making goes in the watershed. And I think we're always looking at ways on how we can equally balance the policy decision making and land use decisions where it's not overburdening developers and builders, because of course they play a vital role to our economy as well, but at the same time looking at ways that we can continue to improve water quality and reduce flooding. We know we have a problem. A lot of streams in Iowa have a problem. So it's looking at ways on balancing that problem, working together as a community, and that's something that I think we've been pretty proud of here in the Dubuque community, is that we have extended across these political boundaries and work together and form some great partnerships. Because without those partnerships, it's really very difficult to see results and improvements in water quality.
So we've got some policies in place, especially we've talked a little bit about new development. And I think that's maybe where people can see this. Talk about what this means for new development or industrial development, what kinds of things they're working on.
Well, within the city and within the county, when new development occurs, we have some regulations in place that require the developers to look at stormwater quality and implement practices such as bioswales or rain gardens or native planting or soil quality restoration to really look at those types of things. Now, when we deal with the Catfish Creek plan, one of our core elements is maintaining a good green infrastructure network to try and keep as many green spaces preserved and connected as possible so that the ecology can thrive. So within the plan, we're not saying that development can't occur in the future, but we want to look at sustainable ways that when development does occur, that we're not hurting the ecology further and trying to preserve that. So.
You mentioned there's a lot of great green infrastructure already in the county. Can you talk about some of the projects that you've already done as part of the Catfish Creek Watershed initiative?
Well, Eric can speak a little bit on the Upper Catfish Creek. That was a project that lasted 5 years before the actual full Catfish Creek Watershed Management Plan took place. we're so far in the early stages of development and just finalizing our plan that we don't have any projects in place. We've done a lot of projects within the city and within the county before the plan took place. For instance, the City of Dubuque has for many years now had a stream bank restoration program and a rain garden program that citizens can cost share with the city to implement these practices on their own land. Eric, I don't know if you want to speak about the county practices.
I think when the Upper Catfish Creek Watershed project started back in 2007, we'll still be utilizing a lot of the same practices that were put in the headwaters of Catfish Creek, such as ponds and sediment control structures, terraces, some of the more traditional agricultural practices in the watershed. Cover crops now has become a big hot topic. I think in Dubuque County we've seen it grow, and we see it as a very important practice for agricultural producers to be putting in the watershed. And that's something that we'll be promoting as well. But as far as the urban side of things, we've got bioretention cells, the rain gardens, vegetated swales, permeable pavements. We've seen really an explosion, I think, of urban conservation practices in the last 5 or 6 years that has taken off really across the state and throughout the Dubuque community with the Green Alley program that the City of Dubuque has, the rain garden program that's out there. Soil quality restoration is probably one of the newer practices that we're looking at really coming up with ways to work with landowners on putting soil quality restoration on their property, basically. And what that is referring to is when we're dealing with developers and builders and contractors, we're often left with a very hard clay soil in our developments, and very little topsoil left in the development. And we're looking at ways on increasing, getting that soil broke up as part of final grade, getting compost put back into our landscape, getting our organic matter back up higher in our soils, and thus reducing the need for nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers. But also we're able to use our green spaces, our lawns, as much more absorbent stormwater practices.
So keeping that stormwater on site instead of having to deal with it when it's all rushing to one location.
Exactly, yep.
So you talked a little bit about the ag community, and they play a really important role in this in Dubuque County, and talked about some of the practices that they're working on, but what's the benefit to them? Why are they really engaged in this conversation?
I think the benefit to agriculture producers is, we've never come across as regulatory people that want to come in and tell agri-producers what they need to do on their land, and this is what they need to do to protect flooding and water quality. It's more or less been an approach of how can we help you with your practices on your farm, things that are going on your property. How can we be of assistance to you? And oftentimes, you meet with an agriculture producer and he's interested in putting a pond in or a sediment control structure in. It's really a win-win situation oftentimes for him and for the overall watershed health. He's keeping that topsoil on their property is important to them. Not losing all their topsoil is important, and it has to be, and it's important to us. We don't want that topsoil in our streams at all either. So I think the incentives for agriculture producers is to work together to come up with solutions on their farms that minimize nitrogen leaving, that minimize phosphorus leaving, and of course sediment ultimately leaving their farms. So it's looking at cost. We're looking at ways that we can cost share our practices, working with the NRCS, the Soil and Water Conservation District, and cost sharing on practices so that we can get some of these practices paid for them as well too.
Awesome. And Dean, what about for residents in the city? They're listening to this thinking, how can I get involved? What can I do on my own property that makes a difference?
Yeah, well, I think as Eric touched on, I think soil quality restoration is one of the biggest things that we can start to look at to improve the soil profile within a yard and to help it become more spongy and take up that water and not create erosion or the need for additional fertilizers, which most of the time run off into our streams. As we mentioned before, the rain garden program, I know people are interested in having rain barrels. Of course, we partnered on that a few years ago to get a lot of rain barrels into the city. But the stream bank stabilization program, the rain garden program are still available. We have funding every year for that. For anybody that wants to look at some of the water issues they have on their yard, we're more than happy to come out and meet with them and look at their site and make recommendations and help them through that process. If they're interested in restoring kind of their soil of their land. And
you mentioned fertilizer, and that's the question that I think residents interact with most easily because they're thinking about that every year. Can you talk about best practices for fertilizer or treating weeds, things that people are worried about every spring?
Yeah, I think the biggest key to that is really a good, strong educational background about fertilizer and maybe using the leaves from their trees as natural fertilizer rather than over applying. If you're going to buy fertilizers or pesticides, to really watch the labels on those and the amount that you apply. Using good application rates is probably the biggest key to that.
And I know another thing, being in a hilly part of Iowa that people see and think about the effects on water is how we manage snow. And obviously we want to keep folks safe on the roadways, but can you talk about what communities are doing, kind of best practices to limit what gets into water?
Obviously in Dubuque, with a hilly terrain, safety is a number one issue. And in fact, I've been working with some of the public works folks on site where the salt storage is to do some water quality monitoring within our own parking lots by our salt storage to see what's actually coming out on into the stream. So we're working closely with them, and I think the Public Works Department does a good job at really managing how much salt to put on the roads. Obviously, with a hilly terrain, we have to apply that to make it safe for residents, but looking at the amounts that we use. And beet juice.
So what do you mean they're using beet juice with the salt?
Well, one of the alternatives that the nation has found through studies is that beet juice will help with the de-icification process. So that's being added to the slurry that is put on the road pre-snow before the salting of the roads as one of the best management practices to reduce the icy conditions of the road.
Interesting. So, Dean, I know that many folks in the city are familiar with the work happening in the Bee Branch Creek Watershed. Can you talk about how the two watersheds are related?
Yeah, well, the Bee Branch comprises about 2/3 of the City of Dubuque, and about a third of the City of Dubuque lies within Catfish Creek. So we're closely interrelated. Both of the watersheds, even though they're separate, are part of a bigger watershed called the Apple Plum. So one of the projects that is happening now, I'm sure people are aware of, is the Bee Branch Creek Restoration Project. And we were fortunate enough to partner with the Bee Branch to get money for Catfish Creek Watershed through the SRF funding process. So the interest that would normally be paid back on the Bee Branch project will be applied to Catfish Creek. So in the summer of 2015, we'll be starting some projects within the Catfish Creek Watershed.
Yeah, I mean, we're excited to have partnered with the City of Dubuque and the Watershed Authority Board to receive some SRF dollars to get some projects in the ground. You know, it's great. We've got this plan in place, and now is the implementation time, and it begins this, like Dean said, the summer of 2015 over the next couple years and hopefully beyond, where we're going to be, we've got some dollars now to do projects such as some stream bank stabilization, floodplain restoration, some wetland restoration, soil quality restoration, a rain garden program. You know, we've got a lot of different projects in the hopper. We're excited to start getting conservation practices in the ground.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of things underway. If you both were thinking about the health of the watershed 10 years from now, what do you think are the biggest things that you hope will change or that you think will change based on what's already happening in Dubuque County?
What I would like to see is really an increase in infiltration of water rather than shedding it off. I think that's one of the biggest concerns in my mind for the watershed and beyond. Recharging our groundwater supply is really important. We've shed so much off through the past decades that to be able to capture and treat stormwater on site is going to not only recharge our groundwater but improve the quality of our streams.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of follow up with what Dean said, I think, you know, more infiltration related practices throughout the watershed is going to be big. Again, working with agricultural producers and looking at their land use and helping out with conservation practices on their ground. I mean, we've got a really unique stream in the trout stream up at Swiss Valley that where Catfish Creek starts, and I think to have kids go out there and be able to play in the stream, and to have fishermen go out there and fish, and the recreational opportunities out there is pretty special. And I think ultimately we want to have that, bring that health to the overall watershed. How can we continue to improve the overall watershed? How can we continue to reduce sediment so that it doesn't look like chocolate milk every time it rains? You know, that's ultimately what we're working towards, and what we want to continue to work on.
And how is this part a small part of a bigger picture? What's going on in the state, or how does this impact nationally what's happening in water quality?
Well, there is a nutrient reduction strategy for the nation, and in particular Iowa is looking at this as strong policies. Catfish Creek is just one of 12 watershed authority boards within the state. There are watershed authority boards like the Turkey River, which is close to us, which is 1 million acres and comprises many counties. So we're just one small piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of work to go yet in the state with the creation of more watershed authority boards and people getting plans in place, but it's starting to take hold, and I think with the legislation that passed, with the creation of watershed authority boards, state legislators are looking at this as a viable option for cleaning Iowa waters.
Well, and water quality's been a hot topic, you know, in the state of Iowa as of late, and it has really for the last 5-10 years. It's been a topic that's continued to be talked about. Iowa, you know, has been one of those states that's been criticized for water quality. And when you look at the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico and the hypoxic zone and everything else that goes on there, when we talk about sustainability, not only as a local community, but when we look at sustainability from a global perspective, it is important that we are looking at ways in the Catfish Creek watershed and throughout the state of Iowa, that looking at ways that how we're reducing the nutrients, how we're looking at improving infiltration and slowing water down, because it is becoming a very critical issue.
If folks want to find out more about the Watershed Management Authority or the plan, or maybe putting a rain garden in, where can they go for more resources?
Well, they can contact Eric or I at any time to meet with us about implementing projects on their site. They can go to www.catfishcreekwatershed.org. From there, they can view our watershed management plan and the executive summary. There's a way to become involved within the website, and of course, we're on social media. So.
Great. Well, Dean and Eric, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks so much.
And thanks for joining us for another episode of Sustainability Today.